Class is now in session. I am Professor Hockey, and today we'll be discussing some more Evander Kane news. As just a couple of days ago, I made a video discussing what the San Jose Sharks would end up doing with Evander Kane since his suspension was coming to a near end. And in that video, I predicted that Evander Kane would not end up playing another game in a San Jose Sharks jersey. And just yesterday, that seemed to be confirmed, as it was announced that the Sharks were sending him down to the minors. They were putting him on waivers to play with the San Jose Barracuda. And for those who may have been holding out even the slightest bit of hope that a team would end up scooping him up off of waivers and taking that problem away from the San Jose Sharks, that didn't end up happening. Today it was announced that Evander Kane would end up clearing waivers, and as such would indeed report to the Sharks AHL affiliate, which is the San Jose Barracuda. Now, this gets the Sharks a bit of cap savings and most importantly takes him off of the active roster. The Sharks will now be paying just under $6 million in terms of cap hit this season, but that's really not important in the current year for the San Jose Sharks. I know a lot of people right now, the main thing that they're worried about is that Evander Kane is going to kind of bring down the morale and potentially even ruin some of the younger prospects that the Sharks have with the San Jose Barracuda currently. Well, we should point out that when the Sharks did originally bring in Evander Kane from the Buffalo Sabres back at the 17-18 trade deadline, that he didn't immediately have a negative effect with the Sharks. Otherwise, the Sharks would not have signed him to that 7-year extension. It's pretty clear that things only really started to take a turn for the worse by maybe the 19-20 season, if not just this past year for the 20-21 season. And so when first coming to a new team, a new environment, things seem to be a lot better than when, 2-3 years down the line. Now, of course, the San Jose Barracuda isn't a completely new environment. I mean, it's basically still the same arena. You're just kind of playing for the AHL affiliate, but you can hope at the very least that maybe things won't be as bad immediately, and since this is just a short-term solution, that no one's careers are going to get ruined by the presence of Evander Kane. And since Evander Kane is still a very good hockey player, his presence on the Barracuda could definitely turn their season around, maybe get them some wins, and maybe morale could potentially even go up with Evander Kane joining that team. But as I said, this is clearly not a long-term solution. Basically, the Sharks moving forward have two real options. The first is definitely the cleanest, the easiest, the simplest option, which is just to buy out Evander Kane's contract. The problem is that financially, this is not really a great move for the San Jose Sharks, especially when you consider the fact that already this past offseason, they had to buy out the contract of Martin Jones. And so they're already having a lot of dead cap over these next 6 years, counting this one. If they were to actually buy out Evander Kane, they would have even more dead cap over the next 6 years, starting from next year. And at worst, they would end up paying Evander Kane, they would end up having dead cap on their cap hit of about $4.6 million just to not have Evander Kane on their team. And when you combine that with Martin Jones, you're paying over $6 million with just completely dead cap hit for no good reason. So clearly not a great situation. I mean, just going into the next year, 22-23, with an Evander Kane buyout combined with a Martin Jones buyout, the Sharks would be charged with $6 million of cap hits. So even if the buyout seems easy, seems very simple, it's probably not the way forward for the San Jose Sharks. Indeed, the way forward is obviously through the trade market. And based on what the Sharks assistant GM, now currently filling in as the full-time GM, at least until Doug Wilson returns from his medical leave of absence, and from what Evander Kane's own agent has said, that is something that both parties are working towards accomplishing. Now that brings us to the next worry from the Sharks fan base, which is that they think that when the Sharks are going to be trading Evander Kane, that the Sharks are also going to have to give up some pretty high quality assets to be able to do that. But the thing is that Evander Kane is not some sort of aging player who hasn't had a good season for multiple years. He's not some sort of player who has taken this sudden downswing in their career and has been mediocre for the past couple of years. Evander Kane's most recent NHL action had him being the Sharks' best player. He was a 30-goal scorer. I mean, not technically for that season because it was a shortened year, but he would have been on pace to be a 30-goal scorer, 60 or 70-point player. He is clearly a very effective player still, at the NHL level. And there are definitely GMs out there on struggling teams who would be absolutely willing to take a flyer on a player like Evander Kane, since they wouldn't really have to give up any real assets to be able to pick him up, and he would realistically only be coming in at a $3.5 million cap hit, since the Sharks will absolutely be willing to retain half of that just to get rid of him. And as I pointed out earlier on in the video, when I discussed when the Sharks brought him over from Buffalo, it's pretty clear that Evander Kane doesn't immediately have a negative effect on the locker room. And so if you're a team like the Vancouver Canucks, who seem to be the team that's really mostly in the rumor mill, maybe because they've been struggling significantly, maybe because Evander Kane is from Vancouver, but just to use them as an example, if you bring over Evander Kane, you probably still get the rest of this season pretty good, next season pretty good as well, the year after that maybe also things still going well, and even if things do end up taking that downturn in a couple of years, at that point you're only dealing with maybe one more year at $3.5 million of Evander Kane being a negative presence. At that point you could then buy him out, you can then send him down, you can then eat the cap hit because it's pretty small. And so picking up a player of Evander Kane's caliber for the price of $3.5 million, which is a good third liner, a half decent second pairing defenseman, is an extremely good deal that a team that maybe not obviously any real competitive teams like a Tampa Bay Lightning would be willing to do, but a team like Vancouver or a team like Arizona or a Chicago Blackhawks or maybe even like a Dallas Stars, a team like that who would be willing to take that risk. I don't think that the Sharks are going to have to give up any real assets, anything more than maybe at max like a 6th round pick. I think as a good example, we can just look at the Tony DeAngelo situation from last year. He had been so successful with the New York Rangers. He was racking up a ton of points, but it was very clear that the organization and the players themselves heavily disliked playing with DeAngelo, and as such, the Rangers ended up buying out his contract. Now, a lot of people thought that with that negative presence that immediately affected the Rangers, that he'd end up going to the KHL, which is essentially sort of the league for those misfit players who can't seem to get along with anybody. But in the end, this past offseason, while it was just on the 1-year, very low money deal, the Carolina Hurricanes decided to take a flyer on him and bring him over, and clearly that has worked out exceptionally well, at least points-wise. We don't exactly know what's going on behind closed doors in Carolina, but things have worked out for DeAngelo there, and it's very possible he ends up signing either an extension with the Hurricanes or maybe a bit more of a longer-term deal with some other team come this next off-season. And so if a team was willing to take a chance on DeAngelo, why wouldn't a team be willing to take a similar chance on Evander Kane? $3.5 million for the type of player Kane is. You just kind of hope that he's not going to bring that negative aspect immediately, and you probably win out on that trade. And from the Sharks' perspective, only paying $3.5 million for about 3.5 years is significantly better than what a buyout would bring, and you can finally get done with this Evander Kane San Jose Sharks saga. Class dismissed.